opportunity. Just last month we were here in July, and we've been here a few times in the last few months. So if you are tiring of us, just let it be known, and the invitations will stop. So we don't force our way here; we just come by invitation. So I've learned a long time ago, if I force my way somewhere, it usually doesn't work out well. I only go where I'm invited, and you've been so gracious and kind to invite us. I like the commute. It's 7 minutes from my house to the front door of the church, so I do like the commute. And again, more than the commute, it's just the time to be with all of you. You're so gracious and so kind. I said this when I left last time. I may have said to a person or two, you're very good listeners. I don't know if you know that or not. You're a very good listening church. You're very attentive. And that helps the minister or the preacher, the speaker, to really engage you because you engage me. And you're here because you want to be here and you want something from God. I walked in just at around 9:30 this morning, and the leadership team, the musicians, they were here and they were praying that God, by His Spirit, would be here to touch every life. So thank you for your ministry. To our worship team, of course I was close, but I thought there were more up there, larger in numbers than were actually there. You got such strong presence about you, so I honor you that way. I want to honor Pastor Allen this morning, Mary Jane. We're honored to have you this morning. When I heard last night that you're going to be here, I was really excited that you're here. I'm honored that you're here this morning. And I think part of the dynamic of what has happened at Marley is in part because of the wonderful shepherding you've done for this church, not just for this church, but for this community, Lincoln Way community. And so I honor you today. We honor you today. I love you and so thankful. I've never been, and he's never been when I've preached, so I'm excited that he's here. So I said, okay, God, I better have something because Pastor Allen's going to be there. And I know he does his homework when he preaches. I better make sure I'm up to the task this morning because whenever I've seen Pastor Allen in any sort of ministry or public setting, he always was prepared. He always made sure he was prepared. And proper preparation prevents poor performance. And not that ministry is a performance, but he made sure that what he did and what he provided was substance. And you have been a beneficiary of Mary Jane's ministry and Pastor Allen's ministry. So, and the friendship that we have, I treasure it. And so thankful for that. So there have been a few changes since we were here last month. Last month, Kim was not with me. She was in the throes of just trying to get through her dissertation. And this past July 25th, a month ago today, she sat for her dissertation and finished that. And when she finished her dissertation, the doctor said, it gives me great honor to introduce Dr. Kim McGuire. And I thought, wow, that's my wife. So I said, honey, does that mean we get prescriptions are written early? If I need something, I got a little cough, I can just have you write me a script. And of course, her study is in education leadership and has done a wonderful job, a beautiful job in that. And so we honor you as well this morning, Kim. Honored to have you here this morning. So having Kim as my wife, as you can imagine, I can't be slacking my work either because she'll tell me you didn't hit it. You gotta work on it. Gotta work on it, honey. Gotta work on it. So I'm always motivated intrinsically, of course, first of all, but also to have a wonderful wife who is there to cheer me on, and she's been my biggest cheerleader throughout our lives in ministry. 37 years of marriage coming up here real soon, hard to believe. But so honored to do life together with her. So the title this morning is The Potter and the Clay. And that was the first scripture that we read this morning, The Potter and the Clay. And the subtitle is Submitting to God's Transformational Work in Our Lives. And God wants to bring a transformational work in all of our lives. In fact, we declared it this morning in word and in song that you came this morning with this idea, this thought, this attitude that God, I want you to continue to transform my life. I'm 61 years old. I've been living for God as long as I can remember. But there are still aspects of my life where I say, God, I still need transformation in my life, in my character, in my outlook, in my perspective, in my relationship with you and with others. God, I need to be transformed. I am not a finished product and far from it. And I think we're honest with ourselves, we would all say, you know, Jim, I think I can identify with that. I think that God still wants to do some work in my heart, in my life. And if that were not the case, you wouldn't be here this morning. Because you would say, hey, I've got it all figured out. I'm a finished product. I'm perfect just the way I am. And yet there is a longing within each one of our hearts of saying, God, there's still something that you want to do in me. And there's still something that you want to do through me. And that's the transformational work that God wants to do in all of our lives. I want to ask you a question this morning. I want to ask you a question. So think about your family gatherings. I'm not sure if you come from a large family or a small family that is not only your immediate family, but your extended family. Aunts and uncles, cousins, etc. My mother was one of 8 children. She was the second of 8 children. My dad was the fourth of 4 children. And you can imagine when we had family gatherings, there were a lot of people there. I mean, I probably have, I never counted, I probably have 30 plus cousins on my mother's side, maybe more. On my father's side, my father had 5 boys and 1 girl. There's 6 of us. And my uncle, his brother, had 4 boys and 2 girls. You can just imagine when the 2 brothers, my dad and his brother, got together with the kids, they're 9 boys. A lot of broken stuff with 9 boys, right? A lot of room to roam, right? A lot of tussling going on, you know, a lot of dust flying. And I think about, when I think about my family, our family, when we gather, even today, I met with my cousins, my dad's brother's sons, and a couple of their kids, and my son was there, and my nephew was there. We had a little golf outing last month. And there was probably, I don't know, 20 or 25 of us. And some of the cousins I haven't seen. Now we're all in our 60s and 50s, and some of the, like my son's in his 30s. But when we got together at the golf course there, we may not have seen each other for 1, 2, 3, 5 years, but there's a hug, there's a handshake, glad to see you, pick up the conversation right where it was. Same thing on my mother's side. I mean, when you came into Grandma and Grandpa's house, there was a hug and sometimes a peck on the cheek, and so glad to see you. And even today, when I see my cousins, some of them I haven't seen in years, there's still that great respect and love and devotion that our parents taught us. If you come to our house, if you're a guest in our house, chances are that you're going to be greeted at the door by my wife Kim, and there's going to be a hug that's going to come along with that greeting. I mean, even for folks who don't know us very well, maybe they're a friend of a friend who comes in the door. Kim's going to make sure when she sees you and brings you to the door, you're going to get a warm welcome and usually a hug that way. And we see sometimes, we laugh about it, sometimes people are, now I know some are not huggers, I understand that, right? Some of you are not huggers. You like the arm's length greetings, I understand it. But for some of the friends and family who come to the house who are at arm's length, it's a little bit, oh, okay, well, we're doing this hugging. I had a boss, he just died, he's 87 years old, he just died 3 months ago. Wonderful man, in fact, he hired me in hospice 24 years ago. We became dear friends. Not only was my boss, but he was a dear friend of mine. We remained friends even after he retired. But I would come up to him once in a while and I'd say to him, I'd go to give him a handshake. I said, nah, a handshake's not going to do it. How about I give you a hug there? And he says to me, Jim, or he'd say, McGuire, I'm German. We Germans don't hug. I said, yeah, but I'm Irish, and we Irish, we do hug. And I said, besides, you married an Irish girl, and I know you get plenty of hugs from her, so, but sometimes you were reluctant to come in and give me one of these half hugs, but I used to give him a hard time once in a while. I asked the question this morning, are you a hugger? Do you embrace the people in your life, in your circle, or do you tend to be more at arm's length? And if you're either one of those, it's no judgment on my part, that's just the way you are, and I try to respect that. I'm with people all the time in my life. My work, especially with the hospice chaplaincy. I meet people all the time, and some people are very warm and welcoming, and they welcome the role of the chaplain into their lives and their journeys. And other people are very hands-off, and they're very kind of reluctant to let the chaplain come in to their journey. And that's fine, I respect either perspective. Again, I only go where I'm invited. I want to ask the same question that God asked in our first reading this morning. The same question that God asked Jeremiah, he's asking of you and he's asking of me this question. Jeremiah chapter 18, and we read it earlier. Can I not do with you, Israel, as the potter does, declares the Lord? Like clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand. And so I ask you this morning, Take the name Israel out and put your name. Can I not do with you, Jim, as the potter does, declares the Lord? As clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand. And so I pose that question to myself first. God, can you do with me as the potter does with the clay? Can you, as an individual, as a family, as a couple, as a church, can God do with you and in you as He sees best? Or are we, God, you're over there, and I'm over here, and I'm fine with this? But what we see in our reading this morning is this picture that God is a hands-on God. I don't know much about pottery. I've never made a clay anything. I did just a little research this morning just to kind of familiarize myself with the pottery process. And I learned a few things. First of all, it is the potter who chooses the clay. The clay doesn't choose the potter, right? And we have to remind ourselves that we did not choose God, but God chose you. He chose me. He chose us for this wonderful life that He has called us to. Secondly, with the potter, I learned that the potter does something called wedging the clay. And the reason why the potter wedges the clay, now there's probably some potters in here, and you're saying, oh boy, here goes a novice telling me about pottery. That's not my purpose this morning. But for some of us who've never done anything with pottery, the potter will wedge the clay. And when the potter wedges the clay, he does it to get the bubbles out of the clay. And so I did a YouTube search this week just to see what it looks like to have the potter wedge the clay. They still do it. And they take the clay and they'll pound it on the surface. And they'll make sure the clay is moist because it has to be pliable in the hands of the potter. And so the potter will take the clay and will kind of pound it on the surface and shape it almost black for him. And then they'll begin to take the part of the hands right here, and they'll begin to work the clay, pushing it away. But then with the fingers, they'll take the clay and they'll pull it back. So the clay is always in this push away, pull back, push away, pull back, push away, pull back. And it's always this process of trying to get the bubbles out of the clay. Now you say, well, what's the big deal with the bubbles? Well, I did my research. And the reason why the potter has to get the bubbles out of the clay is because if the potter does not get the bubbles out of the clay, when the potter goes to take the vessel that he has made and put it in the oven, and the oven is going to heat up to about 1900 degrees Fahrenheit, very hot, what will happen to the utensil? The utensil will crack and be worthless. And you don't know that, you don't know there's a bubble in there until it's what? Put to the heat. And that's the true test of the clay. The quality of the clay is when it's put to the heat. Of course, you and I make the immediate application. The true test of my life isn't when the skies are bright and sunny and everything's going my way, but the true test of my character is what? Is when I'm set to the heat of the difficulty of the moment in which I'm living. And God does a work in your life and my life because He wants to prepare us, make us ready for any intensity of heat or pressure that life will put upon you and put upon me. I think we can all agree that a believer in Christ, as we have declared in song and we read His Word, that when we go through difficulties and hardships, not that we're unaffected by them, but that we not necessarily are broken by those difficult testings of our character, of our relationships. And it's the master potter who makes sure that we are prepared for that by continually working the clay and getting all of the bubbles out. After the potter has chosen the clay and has wedged the clay, he chooses the pottery, the technique he's going to use. I guess there's a couple different types at least. Wheel throwing, I'm not sure what that is, or hand building. Again, some pottery experts could certainly clarify that for me and for us this morning. But the pottery then begins to decide what sort of technique I'm going to use with the clay. And you know, God decides the technique He's going to use with you and me. God decides what purpose that He wants to use us for. All, of course, for His glory and for the good of others. But as we read this morning, we all don't have the same giftings. We all don't have the same callings. God has gifted you He has prepared you. He has shaped you. He has formed you for a particular task. Unique to you, even as your own thumbprint is unique to you. So that we all don't have the same work. I'm not a nurse. I don't pretend to be one. I'm not a certified nurse assistant. I don't pretend to be one. My role is chaplain, and I remain in my calling, and I stay in my lane. I don't go into a house and start talking about, what medicine you on? No, let me see. Let me think what I do. No, I stay in my calling. But I better make sure in my calling that what? I'm up to the task, and I'm prepared. So then the potter begins to make the pottery. And after he's making the pottery, then he trims it. He decorates the pottery, or she trims it. And then, important moment, it's, I guess, a bisque fire, where the clay, again, is set into the kiln, and the purpose is to remove any water that's in the clay. You got to get that water out of there, have it firm up. And then after it's set in the kiln, it's finished work, then the potter glazes it, and then he puts the pottery in the kiln for that last refining process. It's interesting, don't you think, that God said to Jeremiah the prophet, go down to the potter's house. He didn't tell them what he was going to speak to them at the potter's house. He just said, go down to the potter's house. And Jeremiah went. And it says when he got down to the potter's house, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. Sometimes in my life, I want to say to God, God, tell me now. I know you're asking me to go and do something or be somewhere or whatever. But Lord, tell me, give me a little hint. What are you looking for? It's not the case in Jeremiah. God said to Jeremiah, go down to the potter's house. That's all he told him. And sometimes in your life and in my life, God tells you to do something and you're saying, you just kind of scratch your head saying, what is this all about? But you sense in your spirit that this is what you need to do. I don't know what that is in your life. I don't need to define that for you. That's the Spirit defining that for you on your journey. But I think we could go around this room this morning, and each one of you, many of you, can tell a story, a personal story in your own life, where you said, you know, God asked me to do this, and I didn't fully understand what he was asking of me at the time. But you know, I've come to better understand why he asked me to do what he asked me to do. Sometimes, unless we are willing to go, and until we are willing to go, God is not willing to speak. You say, well, why is that? Because we are people of faith, and we have to trust God in our journey. This morning, everyone in this building, everyone in this room has a challenge, a problem, an obstacle. You have a cross that you're bearing. And for some of you, it's pretty clear why you're in this process, why you're going through this. For others, you're saying, I don't know what God is trying to accomplish in this moment in my life right now. I don't know. Some of you, if you're really honest, would say, I don't like what God's trying to accomplish. I'm not sure if I like this whole process. I'm not sure if I like the wedging process that God has me under right now. But dear friends, he is so committed to you that he moves on the clay and then he always pulls it back to himself. And if you're in a season right now where you just say, boy, I'm kind of lost in this season, understand this. The process of the making of the pottery and of working with the clay is that God always pulls the clay back to himself. And God will always, in the process of whatever you're going through in life, he always draws us back to himself. He always just teaches us something about ourselves, but he also helps us better understand something about him. In the heart of God, you must understand, I must always remind myself that the heart of God is that I would always be pulled back in the process. He's always pulling me back to himself. And sometimes I know when I've gone through difficulty, I'll think to myself, boy, God's cast me off. God doesn't care. God's not interested. He's not aware. He's ignorant to what I'm going through right now. Dear friends, I want you to know in that process of working with the clay, working your heart, God's always going to bring you back to himself. Doesn't matter how young or how old, male or female, doesn't matter your experiences, God works the clay. I want to look this morning at two things. I want to move through it real quick. First of all, the privilege of being chosen by the potter. The privilege of being chosen by the potter. I said a few minutes ago, the clay doesn't choose the potter. The potter chooses the clay. And maybe part of the mystery of your life and my life is, why would God choose me? has he chosen me? What value does he see in me? And it's really interesting that the value does not come from the clay telling the potter, hey, I'm valuable, use me. But the potter goes out and he looks for the clay that he wants to work with, the material that he wants to work with. And he says, that is of value. I need this material because I have a useful work for this material. So there is a privilege of being chosen by the potter. This morning, at the bedrock of your life, at the bedrock of my life, am I able to say, when everything else is taken away from me, I'm able to say, God has called me and it is a wonderful privilege. I belong to God. How thankful I am. Doesn't mean we have an easy life. Doesn't mean it's a carefree life. But the bedrock of your life and my life, I can say, God has chosen me. God saw value in me perhaps when no one else saw value in my life. The clay does not establish its value. Your status, your position at work, the money in your bank account, the homes and the properties that you own do not establish value in the sight of God. None of that matters to God when he looks at your life. None of it. Now, it matters in culture. It matters at the workplace, who the boss is, chain of command. All those things matter. I understand. I live in the same world you live in. Right? Status symbols, etc., the car you drive, etc., whatever. But God doesn't look at your life and my life and say, oh, look at that. He's driving a Bentley. Boy, I really value him. He's driving a Kia. I'm not too sure about that guy there. No. Don't knock on Kias. They're great vehicles. Love Kias. They're all over the place. Right. But I know how human tendency is, that we say, well, what's the label? And that's the value we place on it. When God looks at your life, he looks at my life. He looks at something different than oftentimes we look at. There is so much to be discovered about the value that God has placed upon you. Some of us in this room were raised in an environment where your parents or your grandparents didn't think much of you. And they told you. A coach or a boss or a teacher didn't think much of you. And they told you. You're never going to amount to anything. You're a slacker. You're a slacker. You're lazy. You're trouble. Whatever tag that someone has placed upon us along the way. And somehow we'll take that word that someone will have spoken to us once, twice, 100 times, depends upon the environment, and we'll absorb that and we'll own that as our value. And again, there may be someone in the sound of my voice who you're still living with the value that someone spoke to you in your childhood, adolescent years. And I'm here this morning to remind you of what the word of the Lord says. What he even said to Jeremiah. Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart and I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Long before Jeremiah's biological parents laid eyes upon him, God said to Jeremiah, Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And I appointed you. I wonder what Jeremiah's younger years were like. He was a prophet. So what we know about the prophets in the Old Testament, and sometimes even modern day prophets, is they can be kind of quirky. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know what kind of childhood he had. If he had a good upbringing or a hard upbringing, I don't know. But when God called Jeremiah, he said to Jeremiah, Jeremiah, I knew you even before you were formed in the womb, and I placed value on you. I have appointed you. I have called you. And this morning, if there's someone who is carrying a burden that you have carried, a perspective of your own life that you've carried even from childhood, about what someone else or a class of people have said about you, hear the word of the Lord this morning. Before you were formed in your mother's womb, God knew you and he appointed you. He saw in you a material, a clay that he wants to take and he wants to form and he wants to use. Dear friends, we can leave this morning with an understanding that we have an appointment. God-given appointment. Not given by our parents or by our teachers or by our coaches or by our boss or anybody else, but we have an appointment and instructions given by the living God. The privilege of being chosen by the potter. Our value is established by God himself. God sees the value in your life and in my life even before anybody else sees the value. The potter sees the clay for what it can become. The potter sees the clay for what it can become. He has a vision for that clay. And you know, God has a vision for your life. He has a vision for my life. He has a vision for this church, for this community. God has a vision. God, I want to know what your vision is for my life. And I want to walk in that. I want to give myself to the process of being clay that is pliable in your hands, useful and ready for any good task that you would call me to. And I know that's your heart this morning too. That's why you're here. So the privilege. And secondly, there's the purpose of being chosen by the potter. There's the privilege and there's the purpose. And there's always a purpose. God always has a purpose. He always has a plan. God always has a plan. I want to say that again 100 times if I can tell you. God has a plan and he has a purpose for your life. And you're still saying, what is it? Sometimes at age 61, saying, okay, God, what are you up to? Where are you going with me, God? I'm here, I'm pliable. But God has a plan and a purpose for your life. And you hold on to that. I've been chosen by the potter for a purpose. There are still people today who are working with the clay in various parts of the world. Some of them, not because of the hobby, but because they have to make the utensils. Now, I don't think often we think of the pottery and the clay in antiquity, years ago, but there's still parts of the world where they're still working with the clay. And when I think about the potter working with the clay, it's always for a useful, it always has a useful purpose. It could be for a bowl or a plate. Maybe you had a new child come, so you got to make another plate for the next child, or whatever utensil. Maybe it is something for the hut, or the house, or the wherever. But the potter always has a reason, purpose for making something. And God has a purpose for your life and for my life, and we need to hold on to that. And it's interesting. The clay doesn't get to tell the potter what the purpose is going to be. Now, I find myself tempted from time to time to tell God what my purpose should be. Anybody else in that same camp? Once in a while I say, okay, God, here's what my purpose is. Here's how you can use me. It was nearly 26, almost 27 years ago, before we even moved to New Lenox. I came and I walked the town of New Lenox like Abraham walked the land, north to south and east to west. I've told this story a time or two, maybe I've told it to you. But I'll never forget walking the town of New Lenox in that cool, cold March afternoon on Tuesday. It was raining out. 1998. Just praying over the community. And I remember the thought came to my mind, or the word came to my heart, whatever you're comfortable with holding on to today. But I remember the word coming to my heart, just the sense in my spirit, that God's speaking to me, Jim, do not define ministry for me. I will define ministry for you. Now, that's important for me to hear that because for the previous 13 years, I had been involved in pastoral, a local congregational ministry. And we were moving to New Lenox in a whole new season of our life. And the word of the Lord was saying to me, Jim, how you have done ministry in the past, do not define it for me, I will define it for you. It was the most liberating moment, one of the most liberating moments in my life. When I really sensed him put that nudge in my heart, Jim, don't tell me how I can use you. Just remain available to me. And I tell you, it's been the most fun 26 years, the most liberating time in ministry to simply say, God, here I am, how do you want to use me? I mean, the fact that I'm here at Marley Community Church, one of the most historic, highly esteemed congregations in my estimation, Here I am, I feel the pulpit several times now. Only God can do that for us. Because I simply said, God, here I am. Here I am. And I say it every day. God, here I am. I want to use me. And if we'll get up every morning with just simply saying, God, I am not the potter. You are. I'm the clay. How do you want to use me? I think you might be surprised how God might choose to use you. I have found it a wonderful, wonderful journey. Not always easy. Kim can tell the stories. There's been some bumpy roads along the way. There's been some storm clouds that have come, and the waters have risen in our lives. But God has remained faithful, and we have been steadfast to say, God, use us. Kim's whole journey, I don't have time to go, her whole journey in public education has just been, God, we're available. Wherever you want to use us, we're available. And she took that next step, and the next step, and the next step. And God continues to unfold His grace and mercy, and He continues to work in our lives as He is working in your life. And so the clay does not tell the potter its purpose. I want to finish with this thought this morning. You've been very gracious and very kind with me, as you always have been, very patient with me. I want to thank you for that. This morning I started the sermon by asking you, when you think about your family, are you a close, embracing family, or are you a come at arm's length? And sometimes, folks, we can tend to be that way with God. And we say, God, you created this thing, you got it going, but you're off there doing other things, and I'm just going to live my life over here. I'm going to do my thing, and when you need me, let me know. And some people have a perspective of God. He's just disconnected. You know, He gets it going, and it's ours to figure it out. But I've not found it to be true in my life, at least. I found it to be true that God is interested in the details of my life. Sometimes remarkably so. What I thought was an insignificant event or an insignificant conversation or connection, all of a sudden I look back and say, oh my goodness, I didn't see that. And then I see the hand of God. I see the tapestry of my life. Not just a single thread, but multiple threads that have made this beautiful tapestry. When I came in this morning, I saw the quilt there hanging. I didn't notice that before. I saw the quilt. Beautiful quilt. I don't know who made that or how many people made that. Beautiful quilt. And in the central is a beautiful picture of the church building here. Such beauty. Such dedication. God has used so many people along my path to bring about the necessary changes in my life that I need to have. Some are still with us. Some saw me for a day and quickly moved on. Others have been with me a lifetime. So is true with your life. But today, can we say, God, you are the potter, and I am the clay. Is there a room in your spiritual house where you say, God, you're welcome in every room in my spiritual house except for this room over here? This is my room here, God. This is reserved for me. You can come anywhere else you want to. And God is simply saying to you and to me today, will you allow me to have my transformational work in your life? Will you be pliable in my hands, understanding that whenever I work with you, I am always bringing you back to myself? Dear friends, today is a wonderful opportunity to simply say, yes, God, you are the potter, and I am the clay. Amen.